evening and good to have you with us on this edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, we've got four big conversation points, four big story themes lined up for you. To begin with, we are going to be talking about boycott China and Chinese companies and Chinese goods once again, but this time from the point of view of policymakers. Remember, I told you if decisions must be taken, they should be at the government level. Haryana, Maharashtra have taken the first big step. Theme number 2 that we will talk about is China's cyber warfare bid, attempts being made for phishing, for cyber attack. On target list are government ministries as well as media organizations. How should you prepare it for yourself and arm yourself for this kind of an eventuality? That's what we will talk about. And then at 9 p.m. viewers, I will bring you the details of the Pradhan Mantri Garib Rozgar Yojana. Now this is under the Garib Kalyan Yojana, but the employment scheme, the job generation scheme for the migrants who've returned home. We'll also talk about why some states are upset because they have been excluded. Why is that? And then from 9:30 onwards, we'll put the spotlight one more time on the India's biggest cities. What's going on in Bengaluru now and in Chennai, Madurai, in Hyderabad, Mumbai and outskirts of Mumbai, all of that on our radar here tonight on the Urban Debate. So let's move on and begin with the big conversation point, which starts with the boycott China chorus that's not just now growing amongst netizens or citizens in their having conversation in their living rooms. This has now become a strategy that government after government seems to be looking into. Over the last few days, we've reported to you even within the center, within the finance ministry, even from the PMO, there have been feelers that have been sent to various departments to consider what can be done to hit China economically, to reduce the dependence on the Chinese imports and to block Chinese companies where we don't need them. And now it is the turn of the states. Let me just give you some examples right now, viewers. Maharashtra has actually now put on hold its contract with Great Wall Motors. An MOU had been signed with this auto company. They were going to set up a plant in Pune's Talegaon that worth 3,700 odd crores. Plan MOU has been put on hold. Similarly, Maharashtra's contract with Photon and Hengli Engineering, two other companies, those MOU and agreements that had been agreed upon have been put on hold, roughly amounting to about 1,200 crore worth of projects. That's not the only state. This is a Maha Agadi Alliance run state. There's also a BJP run state, Haryana, that has now cancelled the contract for pollution control equipment that had been given to a Chinese firm. In fact, in Maharashtra, even the MMRDA's contract for monorail worth 500 crores that was given, that tender and those bids that had been put out only saw a response from Chinese companies, so that too has been cancelled now. And there are various other examples. We've spoken to you about BSNL's contract for 4G upgradation, where a Chinese company was involved and they have said they're not going to be doing any projects with Chinese firms. A sister company, a subsidiary in fact of railways, that had already struck a deal with Beijing Railway Research, but that project wasn't going anywhere. It was far beyond its deadline, and that too has now been cancelled. So gradually what you are seeing are state governments and central government actually begin to take a clearer stand. Now, not just this, traders themselves, 20,000 MSMEs in Noida have said that they're going to boycott China. Traders body, the national body, which is the CAIT, they have put out a list of 3,000 goods, which we discussed the last time. Whether you talk about traders in Madhya Pradesh, in Hyderabad, in Jaipur, they're all announcing similar intentions. So I guess the big question tonight, viewers, is going to be, should India have a policy against made in China? And is India really moving towards that kind of policy already, signaling a policy shift? Because if you remember the last conversation, that was what my stand, Miranao stand was, that if there has to be a change, it can come from the government. We leave it to the government to decide without really pressurizing private companies to do it. Now let's see how this goes forward. So let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us right now. Mr. Tom Vadakan, spokesperson for the BJP, Clyde Crastro, spokesperson for the NCP, Rohan Gupta of the Congress Party joining me this evening. And I also have senior journalists who have quite a bit of understanding about the extent of Chinese companies and investments in our government and private projects, and to what, how much is it possible to really change our policy and start blocking Chinese participation. But first up, let me go across to Mr. Tom Vadakan. Mr. Vadakan, we understand right from the center to individual states now, policymakers are beginning to look at this. Is there a larger concept of how we will do this? Experts warn against any knee-jerk reaction, but obviously in the long term, perhaps it is good to reduce our dependence on any one country.
Tanvi, this is a very important issue that you have raised today, and I congratulate your channel to take it up so seriously, because the matter concerns not only the economy, but the psychological warfare being fought against India, whether it's the cyber warfare or the what is happening at finger number 4, number 8, and whatever is happening. That's not a war. That is basically a kind of psychological battle that's being waged against India. And this is a problem that not only India suffers, but is an international problem. Because now, for example, 80% of Walmart's products, 80% of Walmart's products are from China. And what the US has is 20%. Now it's time that we all wake up globally and take this challenge on, because China, like Arnold Toynbee in his book on history, long back said about the annexation of the Chinese empire, as he called it, is now an economic annexation. They are deep pockets. They have control over Washington's business centers. They have control over media centers. They have control, you name it, they have it. And this cyber warfare is the kind of a situation that no country should face. Australia is facing it. And the world over, I think there should be a confederation of governments across the world. The global community must also join in. We have suffered enough. From 1962, we have forgotten everything. We've gone into a slumber and have treated them on equal footing, and they are entwined today with almost all our economic activities. So it's not going to be an easy effort, but we can't have a knee-jerk effort, and the government of India has taken the initiative. Then the traders community, as you mentioned, 3,000 goods have been earmarked for that. There is Maharashtra, which has acted very swiftly. Haryana has acted, and reports are emanating from all states. Process may be slow, but yes, we are going to be a self-reliant country, and there's no compromise on that. This is about self-reliance and not just about China. The Prime Minister made that very clear. We need to be self-reliant. This is much before the China episode. The battle is about getting India self-reliant, and that's more important.
Okay, let me bring in Rohan Gupta of the Congress Party as well. Rohan Gupta, good evening to you. What is your view? How should we go ahead from here on? Even many of the senior leaders of the Congress have said that yes, we must reduce our reliance on China. But should it come from consumers who boycott products? Should it come from private companies who refuse Chinese investment, technology or equipment? Or should it actually come from the governments who design policies that enable businessmen to look elsewhere rather than China?
See, first of all, I feel that if we have to reduce our reliance on China, it has to be a strategical move. It should not be an emotional move. Because if you see our strategy from 2016, when China opposed our entry into NSG, we are talking about boycotting China. But what's happening in reality? Our balance of payment is shifting in favor of China. Our balance of payment is now $50 billion or more. So I think the implementation on ground and what we talk, they have to be same, number one. Number two, recently everybody is talking about boycotting Chinese product. One of the Chinese brand, they had this online sale of phone, and within 2 hours, the total stocks got exhausted. So I think we need to be, if we have to do it, we have to do it strategically, clearly. Number two important thing, the Chinese share in our imports is 14%. Our export share in China is 5%. Chinese Indian export from China to India is basically 2% of the total pie. So what I'm saying, yes, there is no doubt that we cannot depend on China. I think Modi ji made a mistake by going and meeting Jinping 18 times. Strategically, none of our prime minister have done that in past, and we are seeing the result. You cannot rely on them. Simple. So, as a long-term strategy, the non-essential items, you should first cut that portion so that our import reliance on China reduces, and the essential portion where still our industries are dependent on China, whatever make in India or whatever we make or we shift our base to other country. So there has to be a systematic plan where within next 2 years or 3 years we reduce this gap in balance of payment and ensure that we give befitting reply to China. But this cannot be done when something happens. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 and 2020 per person import from China was 3,000 rupees in 2014. Now it has increased to rupees 6,000 per person. So I think it has to be in your action, not only in words. And absolutely, we cannot trust China. We have to reduce
Okay,
reliance.
Mr. Vadakan. Well, I mean, I understand that everybody is feeling emotional, and now that they have betrayed us in such a big manner, everybody agrees in hindsight we shouldn't trust China. But we did, Mr. Tom Varakan. We had 18 meetings with the Chinese, president. We signed MOU after MOU after MOU. All the states. Even then, we were hugely dependent on China. So, does it now look like what the Congress is saying, that this is a knee-jerk emotional reaction?
I think Mr. Gupta has given you enough of statistics. I don't need to go into statistics right now. The point is the umbilical cord that connected China was connected with the Congress. I want to mention that. Whether it was 18 meetings, I have been privy to some of the meetings that the Commerce Minister of that day, of the Congress party, I had access to them. And how things were so made easy for them to get into any business, whether it was getting fireworks for Deepavali or Raksha Bandhan, the clearances they got and the speed with
I
which
don't
it
want
was
to go in
delivered.
bashing of
And
BJP since you are
no,
there.
no, no
I
point.
think let us maintain
No,
that
the,
limit when we do debating.
no,
It
but
is my personal
I'm
request to
telling
you.
you.
No,
No,
I am
One
not.
minute.
please let me
1 minute,
complete.
gentlemen.
If
1
you
minute,
want
gentlemen.
to
If I can
political
just clear
agenda,
one thing, gentlemen. Wow, yeah. May I just make one thing clear that I think all panelists should understand? A lot of you are on Skype connections. When one person is talking, if the other talks, either your voice won't come through or the first person will completely get cut off. Unfortunately, that's how the technology is designed. So two people talking together will just not work in this work from home setup that we have right now, unfortunately. So,
Thank you,
Mr. Gupta, let Tom Vadakan finish his point. I will give you a chance to respond. Yes, Mr. Vadakan.
This is not about bashing the Congress. This is about the reality check. When the searchlight is on the Congress party or the dispensation that came at that time, I was in some of the offices and I was privy to some of the meetings that happened and how easy it was to trade, to get clearances during that period. So it was not about the 18 meetings that occurred, but the results, if you examine it, entwined in such a place. Now, whether it is to be a normal delivery or it is to be a cesarean section, these are things that the country as a nation must think how to get out of this mess. This is not just an Indian situation, this is an American situation, this is an Australian situation. The whole globe is facing this because they have managed to get in. It's not just about land, it's about the economies that they have entwined. So to get out of this requires a national effort across party lines. You can't have the leader of the opposition speaking another language and the prime minister speaking in one language. This is about India. When you talk about India, you speak in one language. Because if China is enemy number one from the economics point
Okay.
of view,
All
from
right.
territorial challenge, from cyber battle, I think we need to show that unity that this country has to show in certain circumstances.
Okay. Clyde Crastro of the NCP is also joining us, but before I come to you, Clyde, quick response from Mr. Rohan Gupta. I promised him that opportunity, so go ahead, please, Rohan.
I'm just making a simple point. Diplomacy is basically a long-term game for any country. The governments can come and go, but the diplomatic strategy should not change a big way. But if you see from the time Modi ji has come from 2014, he has shown faith on China. Maybe it is part of his strategy that there is nothing wrong in it. Why I mentioned the point of 18 visits? Because he's the only prime minister. If you see any other prime minister, none have interacted with China maybe once or twice in the whole tenure. Only point I'm making is maybe somewhere we have made mistake of relying on China, number one. 2016 they opposed our entry into NSC. Again 2017, 18, Doklam and all these things. So they have betrayed our trust all the time. We have been talking this when these things happen. After we forget, no, it should not happen. When you are talking about boycott China, at the same time, you see that one phone brand selling phones in 1 hour, then what are we talking about? If we cannot, basically implement what we speak, there is no point in talking. I am just saying, number two, if there is strategy of this government in this direction from 2016, why the imports have doubled? If there is any strategy, agree, it is a long-term thing, but we should have seen implementation on ground from 2016 to 2020. It's going in other direction. So my only point is, from 2016 we are hearing it. I completely agree we should not rely on China, but we should have a strategy, and every year we should measure how much successful we are in our strategy.
Well, I just want to also say that unless and until we get more self-reliant, we make ourselves enable our own businesses to actually get to the skill level, get to the funding level where they can start delivering on the same lines as China, is going to be very difficult unless and until we make a conscious effort of finding other options and then decide that even if it is not as cost effective, it's fine with us that we go with a Korea or a Japan or do it internally. Those policy decisions have to be taken in a much more deliberate manner. It cannot be instant. Clyde Crastro, we've cancelled overnight agreements worth almost 5,500 crores in the state of Maharashtra. What happens to our great development plan, especially in a time then when there is an economic depression? What's the alternate plan? I'm not questioning this decision, but I'm asking what's the backup plan then?
See, the backup plan will always be worked out. See, this had to happen. Let me tell you one thing very clearly is that in a time like this, we have to come together as one, as Indians, as a country. We need to fight this thing together because it's about time, because this has been going on for a long time now. China's misbehaving for a long time now. The point here is very, 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 very clear, is that we need to now actually take some very, very strict and compulsory measures, like our party president Mr. Sharad Pawar said the other day, that certain compulsory measures have to be taken via diplomatic channels. If you don't do this, it's not going to work. China is going to keep creeping in, coming in from some point or the other. All these things can go on. You can visit China, you can talk to China, you can think different ways of kind of talking to and having a good relation with China. But the point here is, we are being nice to them. Are they being nice to us? Our honorable prime minister has been talking to them, being nice to them. Are they being nice to us? The point here is, now the government needs to put their foot down and take strict measures. And one of the things that we can do by supporting our government and taking the strict measures is to put on hold the contracts that we've been, or the MOUs that we've been taking on. So the point is very, very, very clear right now that strict measures have to be taken. See, China, the point here is, we've been talking about the Galwan Valley and everything, finger 4, finger 8 is what we've been talking about. There's a road connecting from Dubruk to DBO, that's, Daulat Beg Odi, that whole road which is on the Indian side of the LAC. It's where the Chinese want to dominate. We cannot allow that to happen. Therefore, diplomatic talks, strict measures, all these things have to be taken. Our party is with the government. I mean, in times like this, like I said right on the onset, that we have to come together and fight it out. So we have to put our foot down. The central government has to put our foot down.
Those are emotional comments, Clyde Crastro. They look very good in writing as a statement to be issued in the name of your party or party chief. You have to
No,
make
one
you
minute,
you.
one minute.
No, I am asking you what's the
Tanvi,
backup plan. I don't want a
no, no,
knee-jerk reaction based on emotional sentiment because you think that's the public sentiment. You are in government.
no, no,
You
when
are
you
in
finish,
charge
let
of
me get
policy making. Now tell me, if we've lost on business for 5,000 crore rupees, which is fine. We don't want business from China. We don't want to have these relations with them. Okay, if that's your call. But where are you going to get the additional investment then? Maharashtra was being, sold to the entire world as the investment destination, wasn't it?
So now, if you finish, can I talk? Because I'd like to make my point here. Because I mean, I got interrupted. Are you done? Okay.
Yes,
My
yes, the
point here is
question is to
you
you.
said you said something very fantastic. In the last 5 years before our government came in, Maharashtra was being sold out in left, right, and center. We are doing this, we are doing that. Nothing came out of it. That's what our government is doing. Now, you said something. We canceled this MOU, or we sort of put it on hold. It's on a back burner right now. Now, are you expecting overnight to suddenly go? The need of the hour was to put this on hold. And like we can put this on hold immediately, we are also working now. The cabinet meets, the plans are in place, working on it to get what the next step will be. You can't expect the next step to come up overnight. The quick decision had to be taken. China had to get a message from us. We sent the message to China. The central government had to get a message from us that we are with the central government. We are supporting them. So that message has been sent. Emotions, yes, emotions will happen, but also practicality also has to happen. And the most practical thing that we did was immediately put this on hold, froze this, and put it on a back burner. So whether you call it emotions, I call it emotions and practical both. This is how it has to be done.
Okay.
This is how it's going to be. And the plans are in place, will be worked, and we have to think of the future. It cannot be
Okay,
done
okay.
overnight.
Let me bring in. Yes, okay, as long as you think of it, and the point is, I take your point that this is just on hold right now while you figure out what you need to do. Okay, let me bring in our two experts. Siddhartha, National Economics Editor with the Times of India, joins us this evening, as well as Dinakar Peri, Defense Correspondent with The Hindu. Dinakar, let me come to you first. While defense is not really a sector where we are hugely dependent on China, or at least that's the perception, that we're more dependent on Russia and United States. But I did read one report today which said that even our bulletproof jackets that are manufactured, the basic raw material is actually sourced from Chinese companies. So then, to what extent do we go on ending contracts, reviewing contracts, on blocking Chinese companies, even when it comes to defense?
As you rightly said, that's a moot point. See, we are so dependent on Chinese imports for basic materials and raw materials. So that remains our, in a way, our bottleneck and systemic issue, which has to be sorted out first. While the idea of saying we'll reduce dependency on, Chinese imports is a welcome idea. But we should be able to draw a fine line between nationalism and self-sufficiency, I would rather call it, and going overboard and saying we'll stop everything out, because it will only hurt us. It will hurt us more than it hurts China. As you said, say bulletproof jackets is one example of what you said. The other remains, say for example, just 2 months back we saw when we had to scale up our production of paracetamol, we realized the basic raw material was coming from China. We were the manufacturing pharma house of this world, but we were dependent on raw material on China. So these only expose our systemic, deficiencies and supply chain vulnerabilities. So without, addressing these fundamental issues, there is no point harping on, excessive nationalism, which
indirectly
affects our own GDP.
Mr. Perry, can you give us more such examples of how deeply entrenched the Chinese suppliers are in crucial parts of our economy?
It's across the board. I can give you an examples. I'll just take a related example of defense, space. So now ISRO is, we all are aware that ISRO is now building our domestic Navik module, which is equivalent of the GPS, which is our Indian version of the GPS. So, but now the next step in that is to have the Navik module on all our mobile phones and all our GPS enabled devices, so that we can, instead of GPS, use our own indigenous Navik module. So recently there was a few companies coming out with the Navik modules, but it turned out that the module which was built actually came from China. We are using our own signals, but the modules embedded on the chip
Okay.
came from somewhere in China. The testing was done in Shanghai or somewhere, and then was imported to India and then distributed here. So this again exposes the critical area. You're calling space, data, GPS, which is something which innocuous but present everywhere. This is just to highlight the vulnerabilities we are facing. Bulletproof jacket is one, but this is something again more defense oriented.
But very interesting examples. Very interesting examples there. If I can, Mr. Perry, take those examples back to Tom Vadakan. Mr. Vadakan, this is where, deeper rational deliberations will be required. We need bulletproof jackets. We're giving it out to a third company, perhaps a Western company, but they are sourcing their raw material from China. We need to make pharmaceutical drugs, life-saving drugs, not just for our country. We make it for the entire world. 70% of our raw materials come from China. Where do we draw the line and at what cost then?
Tanvi, this is a reality today. Nobody can deny it. Now, for example, there was a time when rubber tires used to come from China. Maximum tires used to come from China. Then suddenly we disassociated from China and started getting it from Thailand. But unfortunately, the trap was not visible. This was Chinese companies who had invested in Thailand and were manufacturing tires. And this is one country that manufactures tires without a manufacturing name. So you can just take a tire and put your brand on it. So the point here is they are very clever and deep in a lot of things. We have to work it. It's not something that it's not a switch on and switch off process. There is this desire to make that change. And I think that step forward is most important. And I think the decisions are being taken slowly. I heard the spokesman of the NCP also say that it is on hold. Well, that's on hold, and the plannings are going on. So let us wait and watch. There is this decision which is pragmatic, that we need to do it. Slow, yes, but it is not an impossible situation. We are to be self-reliant, and that's been a position we have taken much before this Chinese issue. So I think we are moving towards it, and I think we are in the process of developing that. And once we are at it, we are all together in it. I think I accept the fact that they have entwined us in all and this is not just about India. This is not just the Indian story. Now you take the Apple computers and what have you. Where does the parts come from? Whether a variety of products that are marketed in US. So the reality is there. The world has to face this reality and isolate this Chinese infiltration into the economic systems globally. And India, we have now taken a positive step in that direction, and we hope and pray that we will be successful.
Okay, positive step has been taken. Step one has been taken on many accounts. But what are the pits and falls that we need to watch out for as we go down this path, Siddhartha? Because our economies are deeply entwined, and China is not even an easy adversary. Yes, we have a large import share, but there is a lot that we export to them as well. If we set up our own trade barriers, will we end up harming ourselves in the short term?
I don't think we have the local domestic manufacturing capability to, if we decide to block, chemicals or electronic, even the inputs, say you set up a manufacturing facility for mobile phones in India, but I don't think you have the ecosystem to manufacture the inputs that go into it. As someone was talking, someone mentioned about pharmaceuticals, I mean, from Brufen to a basic antibiotic or even a paracetamol. So it is this entire ecosystem that you need to build, and it is not going to happen overnight. You can erect trade barriers, which could be import duties. As someone said that, there was tires were coming from Thailand. Now, tires were coming from Thailand because you signed a free trade agreement with ASEAN. So as a result, Chinese companies operating in Thailand or in other ASEAN countries decided to, sell to India through those routes because they had a duty advantage. so there are. It's a much more complicated issue than is being made out to be. You have Chinese companies operating in other parts of the world, so they could be sending it here, and there's a huge demand here, and you don't have the manufacturing capability. You don't have the kind of approvals that can be given overnight. You don't have the there is this element of subsidy which is there in a lot of Chinese sectors. I mean, we don't have the deep pockets to do that. So you need to guard yourself against that. You need to provide land immediately so that factories can come up and they can start operating in 2 to 3 years. So you need to build this whole ecosystem for which a lot of groundwork still needs to be done.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. In fact, that's where the differentiation really has to happen. You can tell me to give up on a Chinese phone, a Chinese made in China, sold by China, owned by China phone, all right. But what if my phone has 105 out of 500 small Chinese parts? Now, then what am I supposed to do? Yeah, yes, Clyde, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Tanvi, I'd like to stress on this point. You see, we are talking politics, the last few days about this whole India-China standoff and everything. Fair enough. In the economic part, which you actually really stress very nicely on this whole thing, is that what happens with the economic part of things. I'll tell you what. India is the second biggest trading partner of China. Okay, and we have like bilateral trade worth $87 billion with China. The point here is, I think somewhere China is beginning to think that India needs us. It's not that. We need to now actually show them that it's not that we need you. I mean, if we need you, you need us too, because we have the market for your
But we
products.
do.
We are the ones who selling your product. No, so that's what I'm trying to get here is to, like I said, I want to talk a little beyond politics. What I'm trying to stress here is that it's about time that we put our foot down as a government and show them this, that listen, it's not this. You need us. So it's about time, you can come in here just because we are going a little easy on you does not mean that you can take on us. So whether it's on the borders, whether it's in the markets, whether it's individually, talking needs to happen now, giving them a clear signal and a message that listen, you cannot take us for granted, and that's what it is, and that's how we need to do it right now, because we are also a big market here. And like you said, if there's a phone and which is Chinese and there are 5 parts, and that means China is selling all those products to us. So it just doesn't mean that without them we are nothing. Well, we'll take a little time to, like the earlier gentleman, I think from the Times of India said, that maybe we do not have the capacity. Yes, but we will keep building it on top. In the meantime, we need to show China that listen, you can't walk over us, and that's how it has to be.
Okay, Rohan Gupta wants to make a point, and then I will take this back to our experts to really ask them how long does it take to not be dependent on China wherever we are cancelling the contracts. But Mr. Gupta first.
Tanvi, I feel that it requires a holistic policy by Indian government. The Indian government launched programs called Make in India and all. But what is the implementation on ground? We just saw that during the COVID, when it came to giving the relief package, it was more of a liquidity relief package than real relief package. I think the whole mindset, like one of the panelists was saying, we need to support our domestic industries. They have the capability. I'll give you an example of auto part industry, chemical industry. I am from Gujarat. So, there are a lot of capabilities we have, but the government has to take a constant effort in that direction, where you give incentives, you give subsidies, you have to make your local industry strong enough, not only China, any other country. Our balance of payment, it has to shift in our favor. There is nothing wrong in making India a manufacturing hub. But when it comes to China, our dependence right now, the imports are 14%. So when we talk like major plastic goods, pharmaceuticals, textiles, electronics, auto parts, these are the all major items, and these are the major items as far as Indian basket is concerned. So suppose we want to ensure that our dependence reduces, there has to be a constant effort on part of government to support the local industry so the manufacturing base can increase. It can be SME, it can be large industry, it can be clearances, it can be incentives, anything. But it has to be a holistic process rather than talking when something happens, we talk and then we forget. No, we have been talking about taking on China from 2016, but nothing is happening on ground. The balance of payment is shifting in favor of China. So unless and until you empower your domestic industry, we cannot change the current situation. This is what I want to say.
So here is what I want to read out in that context, because you said it and you're right to a certain extent. So this is a news report that emerged, and you know there have been quite a few who've actually spoken about and written about what the PMO has sought. Now the government has actually sought, the PMO has sought a product-wise detail of cheap imports, a comparison of those import prices with our domestic prices, and if there is any tax disadvantage that is being given to any specific industry, pointers on how to curb low quality inbound shipments from China, how to boost domestic manufacturing. Now all of this is now being looked at and deliberated upon. I understand this part. I understand where you say that, okay, let's actually give a bigger advantage to our domestic manufacturing. Let's empower them. Let's make it more difficult for China to export their goods. I understand that. But Siddhartha, that's one aspect. What do we do when we start talking about government cancelling contracts or rejecting the lowest bidders because they may have some Chinese correction? Now, is that simply rhetoric right now owing to the sentiment? Is that really possible in the long term? Wouldn't ideally any public project seek out a good quality, cost-effective bidder for their project?
Well, there are ways to match the lowest bidder, the lowest bid. That can be looked at. And government procurement is something that on which we don't have any international commitment. So we can design our own rules. Now, whether it is in the best interest of competition, whether it is in the best interest of the economy, that's something that needs to be figured out.
Okay, Mr. Tom Vadakan, do you also want to comment on this? It's all right to say so that we won't give our contracts to the Chinese companies, but then what happens to the idea of building cost-effective, good quality infrastructure, just as an example?
Well, you heard Mr. Siddharth on it, and I think he gave a fairly good answer on that. Whether it is in the tendering process, matters could be examined of what is the next best step that could be taken. This is subject specific. Now, there is one thing I need to say. Yes, we are for all domestic manufacturing processes to be developed, MSMEs and what have you. But at the same time, the supply chain, there could be an international coordination to leave out China and find a supply chain and find places where we can get the supply, and also locally manufacturing these things and be part of a supply chain internationally. So I think this is a window of an opportunity to actually garner a new supply chain, either internationally or nationally, link up internationally, so that you are giving the Chinese a run for their money. You have to have the industrial processes, the SEZ zones. You see, the competitiveness of zones that are in China and India is far different. I think the government must examine these policies, and they are already on the job, let me assure you, that they're looking at it very closely. And I'm sure in the coming times, we'll see a total change, and the mindset has changed. And the important thing is that we are now looking at a situation where we have to be totally independent, tied up internationally, but not being there's no parasitic growth in our system. You let some parasite live on our economy, and that eats you completely, and that situation should end. And I think not only for India but globally also it should end, and that will teach each country that, look, we all are in this global village together, and we are there for the betterment of mankind, not for destroying each other, not raging wars against each other, or doing the cyber games that they're doing. It's unfortunate, but yes, we are all together in this.
Okay, no, I understand what you're saying. One more other point I wanted to highlight to our viewers, and this is as news is just being, the news just coming in, and PTI has filed this report saying that citing defects, the Weightlifting Federation has halted use of Chinese-made equipment. Claiming to be saddled with faulty equipment from China, the Indian Weightlifting Federation, or IWLF, has actually called for a boycott of these sports apparatus. Now, this is the second such story that's come out. The earlier one was a project that the railways had, where the deadline was 2019 and we are in 2020, and the Chinese firm had not even done 20% of the work. Now, I think where there is faulty equipment coming in, or the company is not doing their work, those contracts should have any which way has been cancelled. Those contracts should have been cancelled a long time back. Those companies should have been taken to task. If Chinese sent us faulty test kits, we sent those test kits back. And we said we are not going to be paying the cost and bearing the brunt for it. That should just happen as a good trade policy, as a good business and economic policy. To use those instances to ride the wave of this sentiment and emotion, I think viewers, is also trying to fool you a little bit, which you should watch out for. A larger change in policy, a shift in an actual visible stand in policy to say no, we are going to reduce our dependence on China. We're going to be more make in India and less made in China. That's understandable. I believe Clyde wanted to make a point. Go ahead, please, Clyde.
Tanvi, I just wanted to tell you that I'm very glad that I hear Mr. Tom Varakan say what he's saying. I mean, he's been stressing on the point that we need to be self-reliant, and he's been stressing on the point that how we should sideline China. And it's a strong voice. You know, what he's saying is a strong voice. But I would just I hope and pray that his, the central government speaks as strongly, as vociferously as he has spoken today. I mean, they should need to put their foot down and say what he's been saying today, that we need to sideline China, we need to make sure that we are self-reliant, we need to start a process where we can do things together. I don't know how much and how soon we can do that, but stronger voices need to come out from the central government, send a message across to the country saying that, listen, we are putting our foot down. Send a message across to China saying that we are going to put our foot down, we're not going to take it from you anymore. That's the voices that we need to hear in the next few days, coming days, that we need. Yes, I understand that it cannot be done overnight. Things will take time because a lot of things have been happening over the last few years. But in the coming days, we need to hear more stronger voices, louder voices that from the government saying that, listen, China, we are not going to take it from you.
I just want to also tell our viewers, few more bits of information that have come in. While Maharashtra, like I said, has cancelled, has put on hold contracts worth about 5,000 crore. There's also separately the news that has come in about MMRDA, putting on hold the monorail bids that came in from Chinese companies. Haryana has cancelled 2 tenders worth 780 crore rupees. Uttarakhand is reviewing its decisions and said they will be coming out with an announcement very soon. Uttar Pradesh has said that they will not be buying Chinese products in their energy and the power sector. Now, that's an interesting point. Will not be buying the Chinese, or will not be pulling in the Chinese in energy and power sector. But these are crucial sectors, Dinakar Peri, where we will need some amount of international equipment, international collaboration on technology, on investments, and on basic infrastructure as well. What are our other options? Let's just talk about defense, for example, and some of the things that you were mentioning, or pharmaceutical, or telecommunication. Do we have other viable options right now?
See, talking about specifically about defense, we should understand with defense there's a peculiar situation, if you see, because we are extremely dependent on imports for all the major systems. But again, even at the back end, as in any third country where we import from, we don't know what exactly is going into that, the components or subsystems going into that particular product. For example, sometime back, even the US realized some of the things they were building had sub-assemblies and components which were sourced from Chinese manufacturers. Even they had to, address that issue. This was not too long back. So this is another issue when we say refrain from Chinese components or imports, even in defense, is something we have to make a proper framework about it. Domestically, when you say a bulletproof jacket, it's much simpler to verify because they are coming from a domestic supplier. But we have large number of imports. How do we address that? That's something we should deliberate on this. I mean, we need a proper policy on this. There's some amount of thinking on this, but in light of the new, this new campaign and
Right.
change scenario, we need to deliberate that. On the other sectors, again, this again applies. So for example, recently at the foreign secretary level, about 7-8 countries were holding weekly conversations regarding the COVID situation. And one of the thing was that they will strengthen their supply chain mechanisms, move away from China and so on. So this is an opportunity for India in multiple ways.
Correct.
One, it will only improve our own supply chain. All the other speakers had highlighted various areas of it, where it's not just simple, it can't be done overnight. We need to build on it. For that, this is probably one important avenue where we can also be part of the global supply chain.
Yes, and an immediate response, Dinakar Peri, and to all our panelists. Yes, I'm sorry I'm coming in because I'm a little short on time. I take your point you're making, and it shouldn't be that our immediate reaction to anything that we need is to turn towards China because it's fast, they make it available, cheap, and they pretty much manufacture anything that you can think about in this world, which is why everybody turns to China. We did that with our COVID products as well, and look how it got us into trouble. We ordered these rapid testing kits from China, waited for them for the longest time, they got delayed, they finally made it to our country, and then they turned out to be faulty, and then we had to send all of them back, look for other options, and derailed our entire testing strategy and plan by weeks. But one more time I will reiterate this, viewers. If you're feeling emotional and angry and sentimental about what China has done, I understand that. You can go ahead and give up on the products and boycott these products if it makes you feel better. But anything constructive, anything that will actually impact China, hit China, will have to be a long-term policy, will have to be done with the policy makers in playing a bigger role than anybody else. Empower your Indian businesses, provide them a level playing field, if not any specific advantages. Then take an inherent call that you are going to be all right giving out your public project partnerships to non-Chinese companies, even if it means that they cost more, even if it means that they take more time. And then be prepared for what the costs and repercussions may be. It cannot be a knee-jerk reaction. It's fine that government after government just wants to issue press releases right now saying, oh, we are putting this on hold, we are going to review that, we are going to review this, we may cancel this contract which is barely even moved on from an MOU stage for 5 years. Some of this is just propaganda that's sometimes done by the governments to make you feel as if they have signed big deals, and then those deals that go nowhere often get scrapped on paper itself. But yes, if we are serious about changing our strategy towards China and reducing that dependence, then it does need some serious deliberation. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.